Okay, superstars. This video is for the super scholars of EDUC 2400, spring 2023. So my section one face-to-face class, very brilliant, future teachers, future dream keepers. So I want to discuss some of the excellent questions that have come up in our 3x5 quiz cards, and they are most wonderful. I enjoy the little drawings on some of them, and the humorous points, others just very insightful. So, let me just take a minute to try to address some of these questions for you. Um, okay. The first one is about if I slip up on pronouns by accident and offend someone, how do I explain and solve that? That's a great question, and it's one that comes up a lot when I'm doing trainings for people. This really worries people because um we don't generally want to hurt other people, and so we get real nervous, and um we're uncomfortable and afraid we're going to make a mistake. But I would tell you that the best thing that you can do is try to become very comfortable in that community. Um, for example, you know that I am from Mobile, Alabama, and that city is 54% African American. So many white people spend very little time in all Black settings or mostly Black settings. And usually it's with a token person of color, but not like where the majority of people are people of color, and particularly Black. So a lot of times white people are afraid to touch them. Like when somebody's getting change at the grocery store, they don't want to touch them. You know, they're just so awkward and afraid that they'll be somehow offensive. So the best way to get around that is to educate yourself as much as you can by listening, reading, watching, documentaries, whatever, and just try to familiarize yourself with that community and spend time there as a learner. Not like you're going to the zoo or something, but so that you can really see other people's humanity. I never try to be colorblind, so when I'm in situations where I'm the only woman, or I'm the only white person, um I'm aware of that, but at the same time, I try to do what Malcolm X said when he was talking about, I don't want to be separated or integrated. I just want to be fully human. And remember that poem that we read called Asian, and she kept on have other people try to put her in a box, and she didn't want to be put in a box. She People were like, well, this is what it means to be Asian. Oh, I know what that is. You probably are good at martial arts or something like that. And she just wanted to not have those boxes around her. And so when you are interacting with other people, it becomes more natural if you're more familiar, and you're used to crossing boundaries. Everybody has to start somewhere. And so you start to familiarize yourself. When it comes to pronouns, that's an easy one to slip up on. I do that too often. And the best thing that you can do is just simply apologize. You know, just say, "Oh, I'm sorry," and if it's authentic, most people are fine with that. You know, if you're like me, you're interacting with a lot of people every day, and sometimes you do forget things like pronouns. So the best thing that you can do is just apologize. If that happens, just apologize, and move on. You don't have to be flogging yourself that, oh, I'm a bad person or what. No, just apologize and move on. We all make mistakes. Nobody's perfect, and there's bound to be miscommunication sometimes. So get to know different groups that you haven't been familiar with, and don't be afraid to apologize. And if you really harm someone, work toward restitution, where you try to do your best to address the harm that's been done. Okay? So don't sweat it, there's another one here, and it's kind of similar. It's about walking on eggshells. How do we be respectful to other groups without feeling like we are walking on eggshells to not offend? And this is, kind that falls in line with that very much so, where if you're so stiff and so worried, like your own gifts aren't going to come out because you're so stiff, like at the end of the day, we don't want to be integrated. We don't want to be segregated. We want to each be fully human. I don't want to be put into a box of what maybe some people's idea of what a woman should be is. That doesn't generally work for me. So like there's not too long ago, even my own dad would really have trouble with understanding that women could be good at some things that are typically seen as male. When I could fix his sink because he had the same problem that I had with my sink and I fixed it, he didn't believe that I could do that because he had these notions about women and putting women in a box. Well, I don't like being put in a box, and you probably don't either. And so the best thing to do is be yourself, be authentic, be open, be caring, be someone who learns. And that way you're not like tiptoeing around. You're going to make mistakes. We all make mistakes. So I have shared with you some of the ridiculous things that I have said and done and just been completely embarrassed about and had to apologize. And then a lesson learned moving forward, And so try not to get yourself so uptight that you do feel like you're walking on eggshells. You want to be able to connect one human being to another. Remember how we talked about Shiva with the different arms? So try to find points of connection, that are authentic. Maybe you both love dogs or whatever. So, okay. Let's see. What do I do if one student is bullying a student who identifies as queer? Okay, stop the bullying immediately. No matter what it is, stop it immediately. Intervene. So it might not just be about a child or learner that identifies as queer, although that does happen quite regularly, as you know from the videos. Intervene right away. Stop. It's kind of like triage. You have to stop the bleeding right away. You can talk about it and debrief it once the bullying is stopped, and it must be stopped immediately. And even as you're doing practicums and things like that, it's not okay to just sit there if you see something that, is physical harm to someone, or like bullying, that, bring that to the attention of whoever needs to know, the classroom teacher. If the classroom teacher doesn't seem to mind, or maybe even contributes to it, get a hold of the principal, but stop the bullying right now. If it's making fun of somebody because of their language, of any sort of issue that's coming up, stop it immediately. When I was working on my dissertation, the kindergartners that I was doing this study with, they one of the little boys liked one of the little girls. And so to get her attention, he was punching her in the stomach. Okay, so obviously that is not okay. And it wasn't meant to bully her. He was trying to get her attention, but that is not the way to go about it. So you have to intervene, go to them, pull them apart, let them know, the person doing the bullying as well as the class, when the time is appropriate, that bullying is never acceptable. Harming someone in any way is not acceptable. Okay, so the answer to that one is intervene immediately, and then start debriefing. And what are things that we could do? You might have to role play. You might have to practice different scenarios, read some stories about it. Have a guest speaker come in. There's many ways to address it, as long as you stop the bullying that moment. It may not happen. Every child should feel safe and able to fully participate in your classroom. Okay. Let me see. What's this next one? What are some strategies to help disabled students using universal design principles? Okay, so that one is, we're going to talk about that in class on Tuesday. And this is where you're looking at a lot of the issues of equality versus equity. Now, I kid you not when I say that many people who are even leaders of states, cities, even in our Congress, they might have national TV shows. I kid you not, they do not know the difference between equality and equity. And I know that you do. So what you want to do with any of the groups, including students that have diverse abilities, you want to be equitable. So maybe you want them to be able to safely and fully participate. So depending on what the situation is, to make it equitable, you might have to have other resources for that student so that they can fully participate as well. This wasn't in a public school. In fact, it was in a community center where I was working, and we had children who attended, as well as some classes and groups that were for the elderly. And one of the things that I learned there was that when we would do breakout sessions, a lot of these people were not able to stand on their legs for very long. They had walkers, they had canes, things like that. And some of them couldn't walk at all. And so for an activity that we had to be in a circle, I had to have the chairs in a circle with the so that everybody's back was to the inside of the circle. So I had to do everything where everybody was sitting down. So even I did have some people who could stand up, but to make it equitable, I had to have things where it was sitting down. Okay, so you do that in the classroom as well. If it means that the print on the computer screen is bigger, that your handouts have brighter colors, whatever it is, it depends on what the diverse ability is. And then you adjust to ensure that it's equitable for that person to fully participate as well. If it's equality, that means you're doing the same thing for everybody, regardless of, how they come to the task and what kind of abilities do they bring to it. Okay. So that would be one thing. And I would make sure that not all of my activities depend on like paper pencil, because sometimes fine motor skills are not as developed because of certain physical situations and even developmentally. So not everything has to be written. Sometimes they can come up with a song, they can paint something. There's many ways that you can assess. Okay, so that's that. Okay, here's a good one. Well, they're all good. Okay, how do you discuss with colleagues something like maybe they have discriminatory behavior, and better than that, and that is not about equity, and it's certainly not about quality education. So how do you address that? And now, again, this is a tricky one because you have knowledge that many other people do not have. And you have been seeing that with our school practicums, that you come in being very familiar with the laws, you know how to make things equitable as far as language goes, sexuality, gender, and so on. So you know these things and other people don't. And so that doesn't mean that they're bad people. They just don't know what you know. And so, everybody's in a different stage of development. And, so you have to kind of begin where they are. I find questions to be very, very helpful. It's kind of less confrontational if you pose it as a question. And usually I want to know. And so I'm authentically asking a question because I don't know what their logic is behind that. So, for example, if a teacher says, don't speak to that child in Spanish, only in English, I might say, well, why do you have that policy? And so she might say, well, that is the way that that he'll learn English faster. And so you might be able to say, well, actually, there's a lot that we know about second language acquisition. And one of the things is that children learn the second language better and faster when they are drawing on their first language. And so, you can pose it like that as a dialogue, not in any way of saying, you're doing it wrong. Again, if it's something that is physically harming someone, and I know that this is a hard thing to differentiate. Like if their person is immediately in harm, like physically they're being harmed, and even emotionally or mentally they're being harmed, sexual assault, these kind of things, those are things that you have to call the police for. By law you have to call the police for that. And so that's definitely the code of ethics as well for the state of Utah, and just across the nation. That's true in every state. The thing that makes it a little hard is that it's actually harmful to tell someone that they cannot speak in their primary language. So I guess you have kind of this long, slow harm, and then you have the more immediate harm. Now, to me, you know, I don't want anyone to be harmed at all, and especially you and I know that it's against the law to tell someone that they cannot speak in their primary language. So, obviously the person who's giving those instructions are, doing something that I'm sure they think is positive and helpful, but it's not. So, it kind of depends on what your relationship is with the person. You If you pose it as a question, and even you might want to say something like, well, maybe we can look into some things about second language acquisition, because I think that, I've been exposed to some different ideas, but let's just look into that. What might be best practices, and so if it's something like, that the person is, being very discriminatory, just boldly, like maybe they're laughing at a racist joke or something. That kind of thing happens fairly regularly. As someone who's white myself, I regularly have other white people presume that I'm going to think the same that as way as they do, and we call that racial bonding. They think that they're going to have the same opinion from me because I'm white as well. And that's not necessarily true. And so like if people are all white laughing at a racial joke, or even maybe there's some people of color in there, and everybody's laughing at it, it kind of depends what it is. I'm not afraid to laugh about myself, and some things can be gender based or race based or whatever, and I'm certainly okay about laughing about myself. If it's in something that you can kind of read the temperature of the room, and it's being intentionally exclusionary, I don't join in. And so I know people might say, oh, you're just being woke or whatever, but I care deeply about other people's feelings, and who's included and who's not. And so that's just kind of the way I live my life. Sometimes I don't always notice it, but often I do, and usually if it's something that I've done to harm other people, I go back and apologize. Like the other day, I was at a diner here in Cedar City, and I was introduced to some Latinx people who a family that lives here in Cedar City. And so I said hello, and we talked for a while, and then I sat down and ate my own dinner, and we got up and we were leaving, and I walked right past them as if I didn't know them, and I didn't, say anything to them, and they were saying to me, bye-bye, have a good day. And so I did back it up and say, oh, I'm so sorry. I was already thinking about, what was going on, my next appointment. And I just apologized. I didn't mean to be exclusionary, but I was. And so I just apologized, so there's that. One thing that happened to me, which was a very harmful, I was visiting my brother's home in Upper Michigan, and this was maybe 8 years ago. And my niece was about 8 years old, and she was walking around and saying the N-word, not saying N-word. She was like saying the whole word. And Upper Michigan is very, very white, not by accident, but because white people in Upper Michigan use violence, threats, and everything else to push anybody who is Black out of the Upper Peninsula. And they're still known for being very very racist, very exclusionary. So my brother and his wife were hearing that their daughter was running around saying the N-word. I don't know where she picked that up, or why she was doing that, but anyway, I heard it. And so I had my other siblings were there with their children and spouses, and I was visiting from Alabama. So after I heard it, 2, 3 times from my niece, I said to her, that's not an appropriate word. Don't Auntie doesn't want you to say that, and a lot of people were hurt because of that word, and some people even died. And so she was 8, moving on her way. But then she kept doing it more. And it was like, okay, is this the way the whole evening is gonna go? And so I was looking at my brother and his wife, and they weren't doing anything about it. And so I said to her, Auntie already asked you not to do that, to say that word. It's not an acceptable word under any circumstances. So please stop. And I was a little more forceful at that moment. Well, my brother, my dad, and my sister-in-law were very upset with me for having done that in their house. And so they asked me to leave. That they said that I was being too politically correct, and that I thought I was a big know-it-all, and they just didn't want me in the house. So as I had arrived there with my dad, and my dad wanted me to be gone, I had to actually walk out to the highway. If you know anything about Upper Michigan, it's very remote, it's very rural. So I had to walk out there and then catch a ride, hitchhike, if you will, which is dangerous, into the town that my dad lived in. And I ended up taking a Greyhound bus down to Milwaukee and flying back to Alabama the next morning. So it was very traumatic for me. But I felt that, that I just could not stand by and allow my niece to continue like that. I know her parents were okay with that, but I was not. And so it caused a lot of conflict in my family. And they didn't appreciate that, but I felt, I needed to do that, so I did. And they were not welcoming to me because of that after that. But there you have it. So very understandable, tough situation. But is it okay for other people to be harmed? I don't think so. So somebody has to step in, and I can be bold like that, and I will. So I do. Next one. What do I do if I really don't agree, but I'm trying my best to understand something? That is a really easy one. It's a good question in the sense that many people have it. And so thank you for asking that. It's very, very common that that question comes up in professional development activities and so on. So when that happens, what you do is you put that in your back pocket. You do not have to understand. You do not have to agree. You have the right to your own beliefs and your own values, but put them in your back pocket. Because as you saw, if you think about LGBTQ plus, students who identify with anything within that group, including transgender, they have a right to express themselves as they deem appropriate. So that is, super important. You don't get to choose that for them. You don't have to understand it for them. You don't have to agree with them for that. You put that in your back pocket because your job is to provide a quality, equitable education for every child in your class. You don't have to understand. So, don't waste your time with that. You should know what the students' rights are because you don't want to be breaking the law. And so, but you don't have to agree and you don't have to understand. Okay. So put that in your back pocket. That doesn't have any room in the classroom. What your religious beliefs are, what your, ideas about, sexuality, what your ideas about intermarriage, or whatever it may be, guns, abortion, whatever it is, put it in your back pocket. Students have a lot more wiggle room in that than you do as the teacher. So you're there to provide a quality, equitable education for every child. So you focus on that and understanding what someone else's beliefs are. I wouldn't do it. Don't worry about it. Don't waste your time. You focus on providing quality equitable education for them and put your own beliefs in your back pocket. Okay. Let's see. Almost done here. Okay. Who are the peers that work with students who have IEPs? That depends on each school. So in the school that I worked in, I was the mainstream classroom teacher. And so the children that had IEPs were spend a couple hours a day in my classroom. And so we did a lot of group work, partner work, whole class work. So the students that had IEPs, I knew like where I needed to make things equitable for them. And so they would have time. I would make sure that everybody had the opportunity to be an expert at something in our classroom. And so the students that had an IEP were also experts in the classroom at something. So we moved that around a lot so that everybody was an expert at some time. The groups were really fluid. So everybody was helping everybody else at some point. Okay. So, and I knew what to look for because I knew what was on the IEPs. So I, would be very strategic at being equitable for that student with an IEP. And I also work closely with the special education teacher and with some of the students that I had that were identified as being severe, particularly with behavior. They had aides that were assigned to them, and the aide came in, and we just moved everybody in and out, and it was just a big family. And sometimes we have problems in our family, but we worked it out because we built a lot of care and empathy amongst each other. And when another person was struggling, we worked hard to bring them up too, because we knew that if we are a canoe, if one side of our canoe is down, the other side is naturally up. Oh, and we're all going to go down. So let me see. Okay. Okay. Even though laws have been passed for disabled students, what can we do as Dreamkeepers to help them feel more included and accepted among peers? So again, that's going to depend on your particular classroom. Um, who are they? Start with the learners. You're not going to have every single situation in the classroom. And usually, because schools are neighborhood schools, there's going to be some patterns in the community. Like here in Cedar City, you have a lot of rural areas. And so there's a lot of issues related to rural. And so a lot of people have, experience and background with agricultural things. And so, you're going to see some patterns in your classroom. And you might have children that are learning English and Spanish is their primary language. So you're going to be incorporating some Spanish in there. So everybody's learning some Spanish as well. And while that student also is learning English, and you're making it accessible to them. So with students who have diverse abilities, they don't want to be a zoo exhibit. So I have had students that have an extra chromosome or something. And so some of the children would say, well, why does Peter look weird? And so we would, talk about, well, there's many ways human beings look in many different ways. And if you have an extra chromosome, all the better. You have one more. And so, sometimes it will be something that you can see, but that they are also human beings as well. So usually when you kind of help children to know that, first of all, bullying is never okay, and that different doesn't have to be bad, that it's the richness of humanity, that we have people who come in all different sizes, shapes, colors, abilities, and that's what makes us beautiful as human beings. And so every human being has a right to be who they are without shame in the classroom. Whether they sit in a chair with wheels, or whether they have another chromosome or than most of the rest of us do, whether their eardrums are working like some of us who are able to get sound waves, so whatever it is, then they have a right to have their humanity seen. And so you're going to organize your classroom so that their humanity is represented and included in your classroom as well, whether you're secondary or elementary. Okay. And I think this last one is about that as well with second language. Is it illegal in learning a second language? Is it illegal in those classes when the student can't speak English? No. All languages, English is not, by far, is not the only language that it can be the language of instruction. So sometimes if you're working on the content, and their English skills are still developing, maybe they're doing basic interpersonal communication skills yet, and they haven't gotten to the cognitive, academic, linguistic proficiency yet, which is the more sophisticated, then you need to put it in something that is accessible to them. It might be something that they can look at. It might be something that somebody's modeling for them. It might be something that the class is joint producing. It does not have to be language based. Much of our communication doesn't come through the words coming out of our mouth. It comes out of our body, what we hear, what we see, what we're doing. And so if you're working on English, then Yes, you can use the primary language to be able to bring them into the target language of English. So maybe it's like we're going to compare and contrast what are all the words what are some nouns in English, and what would they be in Spanish, or Chinese. So you can do that. So they should never be penalized for speaking their primary language. Never. That should be something that's comfortable in the classroom. Now, I don't speak Farsi. I don't speak Chinese. I don't speak Japanese. And yet I know I could include that in my classroom. And you can too. There's room for it. And oftentimes learners get the biggest joy out of seeing their teacher learn. And for me, I have trouble hearing all of the sounds in Chinese. And so it's hard for me to even learn basic phrases like my name is, because it's hard for me to hear the sounds. With Spanish and other Romance languages, I can pick that up a little quicker, because Italian, Portuguese, French, Spanish, these are Romance languages, and so they have some similarity. So I can pick that up a little bit easier. But I try and I work at learning basic phrases in Vietnamese, because I have Vietnamese children who were coming from Vietnam. And so that's going to be dependent on what you're doing in your classroom. Who your students are is where you begin. So don't be overwhelmed and think I have to know everything about everything right now on my first day of school. No, the first thing you need to do is get to know the students, get to know the families, get to know the community, so that you're not putting stereotypes on them. Okay, that's what happens a lot of times. So like for instance, if you see a child and she says, my name is Jessica Salazar, and you might say, if you ask her, hey, are you going to have a quinceañera? I wouldn't do that. Don't assume that. Get to know them, ask questions before you say, oh, well, Latinx people have quinceañeras. They also break piñatas, so don't do that. Get to know them first. What are the issues in your classroom and in the community that your learners are coming from? So that's not going to be everything. So start with that. Start with the learners, not the lesson plan, and just continue to grow. You are growing as a teacher. It takes 1 to 3 years those first 3 years are tough. Okay. And we lose a lot of new teachers in those first 3 years. Year 5, we lose a lot of teachers too. So hang in there. Don't expect that you're going to know everything right away, but know where you're going with your classroom. And so that you're always thinking about, well, this is what I want it to look like. This is what I want it to feel like. This is what I want it to sound like. How did today sound and feel and look? Okay, where do I need to make adjustments? Okay, so, all right. Well, thank you for spending this time with me, and I will see you on Tuesday.